All right. Hello, everyone. My name is John A. Roberts, and I am the Diversity Programs and Services Coordinator here at Columbus State University. Thank you for carving out the last hour of your morning to join us. Welcome back to those that joined us last month, and hello, new viewers, for joining our Disruptive Leadership series. During our time together, we hope to make it interactive, so we will be using the chat feature, and I will pause to the speaker throughout to address any questions you may have. You can also submit your questions to me directly by sending me a direct chat message. Today, our topic is equity in data and will be facilitated by Dr. Janiqua Williams. Dr. Williams has 15 years of experience within diversity. She has a collaborative and intentional approach to creating an inclusive synergy and development between practice and partnership. Her workshops and trainings help participants identify hidden barriers to success for diverse talent, caused by unconscious bias, and create more inclusive work environments where diversity thrives, so that the concepts of diversity and inclusion are more than just buzzwords. Previously, Dr. Williams served Columbus State University as the institution's lead for the Office of Diversity Programs and Services, working collaboratively to provide services that promote successful university experiences for a diverse population of faculty, staff, and students. Dr. Williams is a Colorado native, initially from Denver. Her academic career began at Johnson C. Smith University in North Carolina, where she received her bachelor's in social work, followed by her master's in educational leadership with a concentration in student affairs from Central Michigan University. Completing her academic tenure, she obtained an EDD in educational leadership and curriculum development. Please welcome in the chat, Dr. Williams. With that, you now have the floor, Dr. Williams.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much for that warm welcome. I am excited to be back here at the great CSU that helped to develop and establish my career in diversity and equity work. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I really want to dive into this new concept of diversity in data. This is an expansive topic that is sweeping the nation, but it's very important, especially in our times in business and in higher education. So we'll just dive right in. If you all have any questions, I'll have some interactive pieces throughout, and I ask that you all just come off of mute and just address any questions that I may have. That will allow for a richer dialogue in our conversation this morning. All right, so before we begin, I want to give us just a little bit of an overview. We'll talk about guidelines of our conversation, the connection between diversity and data, the different types of data collection, and then review data options, right? So, and how you're reviewing an information and data, and then tips and tricks, right? I want you to leave here equipped to navigate data systems within your business, within higher education, within anything that you're doing, being able to have that eye for diversity and connection to data. So as a guideline to our conversation today, we only have an hour. I was talking to our Leadership Institute leaders, and I was saying, this could really be a workshop that lasts, 2 to 3 days, because there's so many rich pieces. So condensing it to an hour, we're going to have snapshots of conversations today. So if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to, reach out and get my contact information, and we definitely can continue the dialogue. But for our guidelines of conversation today, I want us to be mindful that this is a learning space, and not everybody knows everything, right? Even including myself. I've done equity work, as John A. mentioned, and thank you so much for that gracious, warm and welcome. I've done it for 15 years, but I'm still learning, right? I'm still growing in the space. And I think that, as we continue this walk of inclusive communication and inclusive data recruitment and interacting with one another, I call it people work, you're going to continue to learn and grow. So we want to be mindful that others in the space are still growing in the area of diversity, but also understanding how it connects to data. So just be mindful, if you have questions or if you have comments, that everybody is growing in that space, and we want to assume that everybody has the best intentions as we navigate. And then we want to learn. This is I always say embrace the awkward, but everybody's comfort zone is different. I will say that once you start to enter a space where you don't know if you feel comfortable, we don't want you to share anything where you don't feel comfortable, but we want you to be mindful that sometimes our comfort zones are tested when learning is at the door. So be mindful that you can grow and learn in this space, and some things may be, a learning curve, but don't be afraid to ask any questions. No question is the wrong question in this space. So I'll start by asking you a question, and I think it will help set up the tone of this actual talk. How can diversity and data support you? And Johnny, if you can monitor the chat, but those that, if you want to raise your hands, or if you want to just come off of mute and just say, you came to this session for a reason. We know that there's a series that the Leadership Institute is hosting, but why was this session important to you? Why is data important to you in terms of diversity? And feel free to, you can come off chat. You can, come into the chat, or you can come off mute and to answer. I just need a few of you to reply. Don't be shy. I'll tell you, I have a former back. I still teach in the faculty realm. I'm an adjunct at the university, and I was at CSU. So I am very fond of calling on names, if that's the case. But we want to just know that, what does this session mean to you, and how can, diversity in data support you? And I don't think I can access.
Dr. Williams?
Yes.
Hey, this is Dr. Griffin.
Hey, Dr. Griffin.
I'm in charge of the alternative school in the Muskogee County School District.
Yes.
So data is very important to us when we look at issues of disproportionality related to race and gender.
Excellent. And I like that you brought that. We'll talk about the different intersecting identities. We oftentimes it trends to look at gender, race, or social economic status, but we'll talk about a variety of ways in which data can be pulled. So thank you for that. That's very important. I see we have somebody in the chat.
Yeah, so the one in the chat says helps to plan recruitment strategies of students and employees.
Excellent. You took a direct slide from us in this actual training. Recruitment is huge, right? Recruitment, not only recruitment, but retention, right? So data tells the story of that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Anyone else? Two excellent points. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Dr. Griffin. Well, you all may think of them as we move on, but I just wanted to set a stage for us to have the conversation of, what does it look like? Okay, I see another one in the chat. Monica.
That one reads, it helps to understand our customers and how we need to best serve them.
Right. So serving our customers, serving our populations is important. And if we sometimes in companies and in institutions or educational backgrounds, either or, we're used to status quo and doing some of the same things over and over. And it's important for us to pull surveys that we'll talk about different survey types to navigate, but it's important to look at that to know how to best serve our population. So very good. I just wanted to hear the tone and the tenor of the group. I'll start with the baseline of what is data, right? So when we look at data, really data is meaningless unless you've sorted it and calculated it to tell a story, right? It's numbers, it's facts, it's observations, it's graphs, it's informations, it's different quantities, but data is really just different subsets until you organize it to either tell a story or organize it to understand the narrative, right? It's the process of sorting is when we talk about data processing. And so there are skilled people. So I work at Kennesaw State University and I'm the Deputy Chief Diversity Officer, and I have a whole data team that pulls data for our institution. And you'll see, I'll pull a prime example of something that we did within our institution to pull narrative, to seek out donors, to have conversations in the community about what we needed as an institution. So just be mindful that, data is just pieces of information, but it's the processing that creates the information and tells the story. So what is, when we look at data, what does it mean? So we have those sources. We talked about it just being different asset points, but you first want to look at how you can navigate this. So creating a plan, navigating, knowing your subset, knowing your group, and we'll talk about that more in detail, but there should be a plan for your data, right? There should be a process of how you're going to collect it, whether it's in a survey, whether it's in, having a focus group, whether it's having, different dialogues and different subsets, or having both, where you're doing a survey and focus groups after, having a plan, and then work analysis and how you're going to publish it, where you're going to store it, and then how will we reuse it. So as we go into this conversation today, this PowerPoint will be, you will have access to it, but this might be something as you think about what does it look like for my entity, whether it's business, whether it's education. This is the roadmap on how to start the process of looking at data in diversity. What is your plan? What do you want to do with this data? How do you want to collect it? And then when you analyze it, what narrative are you trying to achieve? And not, manipulating that, right? So, in the doctoral process for myself, we can't manipulate data. We have to allow the data to be what it is. We can't tell a different story than what the numbers or what the quantitative or what the storyline told us. We have to tell it as is. And so how do I analyze that? And then how do I publish it, right? So as we go through today, I'll teach you each of these steps, but I want you to first think, when I think of data and how to better my entity, whether business or education, this is the format that I must look at moving forward. So when we talk about benefits, because oftentimes it's not a new concept, but it's becoming more trendy in subsets because it allows you to see the people that you're working with, right? So diversity is the difference of people, but it's people work, right? So it increases levels of trust and engagement and motivation. I feel more comfortable when, I know that for me, I work at a university, we're surveyed on best practices on work engagement. So I'll give an example where it really let me know that KSU was a new home for me. Was we took a survey on work-life balance after 2020, right? So we did some assessment, we navigated in that space, and we realized that certain people were more beneficial from working from home and having a hybrid schedule and navigating in that way. But that came through a survey, that came through focus groups, that came through a conversation where a plan was established and published, and data was analyzed where it showed, work was still being productive in this space. Well, what did that do for me? That allowed me to feel trust in the space. That allowed me to feel like there was a level of engagement of my conversation of what my work-life balance is and how do I navigate that. That allowed me to see that they really care. They're engaged in what I'm doing. And then it motivated me to continue to do the work that we do because I know that my institution supports what I have going on. So that same factor can be true in a business, having a conversation of, just polling your staff. And I do this regularly. When talking with Janae yesterday, I talked about, I have a division that we help to run at the institution. And I constantly do subsets of discussion groups, right? When we're having, when is best for a meeting? When is a best opportunity to talk about promotion and evaluation and strengths and weaknesses? And so, I want to poll the people because as a leader, I could come up with a variety of great ways in my mind to facilitate the workforce, to make sure that we're navigating and achieving our goals. Now, the goal never changes, but their input is valued, right? So I have several working moms within my division. I'm a single, I do not have any children at the moment. And, having a meeting at 8:30 for me is great. Let's go. Let's have a meeting. Let's continue to work. But but it wasn't beneficial for my entire team. We have school drop off, and then in the afternoon we have school pickup, or, navigating between babysitter, passing off of children, how they navigate that space. So having that conversation with them and engaging them and assessing them, that's data work, right? So that's me going to having, a qualitative conversation with them and saying, what works best for you? Now, will I always be able to accommodate? I may or may not, but having that data lets me know how they will best operate. And that allows them to have the trust in me and the motivation to be in a job that supports them and their work-life balance, right? It really informs new perspectives. So the perspective of this is how we do it, when we do it, the time that we do it, there's new perspectives in the space, and you have optimal work opportunities when you're hearing new perspectives, right? And it explores why people leave, right? We hate to hear that people are leaving. There's a high turnover. We're looking across the country at different data sets. I was just working with our chief diversity officer at KSU and others within the system that looks at, how and when are people leaving, right? We look at different narratives, there's different conversations, but we're really working with our human resource department to have equity questions implied on their exit survey, right? If some people, as you all know, you're in the business and the education realm, people leave laundry lists of details as to why they're leaving. They may leave an email, they may leave, in their exit interview, they may have several things that they want to address. But when you're looking at diversity through the data, where does that subset? Did they feel inequitable treatment? Did they feel, that there was a lack of work-life balance? Were there several microaggressions that they experienced where they didn't feel comfortable in the workspace? All of those things are important in developing and to continuing to maintain the culture of our community. So thinking of that is key. Examines absences, tenure. So if there's certain times of year that they're absent, are we being mindful of holidays, right? I have several staff members that celebrate different holidays that are on a different calendar than myself, right? So traditional norms of this is Christmas or this is the holiday break, that doesn't fit their timeline. So are we evaluating that for the people that we're working with? Is the civility in the office and engagement there? And it improves your decision-making. 100%, I can run a better division once I'm engaging with my employees. And then you gain greater insight on target markets. And I really appreciate one of the partners that just spoke in the chat that said, it helps with recruitment and advertising and understanding who you are, but target markets are key, right? So you may be in a business and there's certain entities of people on this side of town that I need to work with. Well, you need to assess those people that may work with you or come as customers that are coming into your business. Are they coming in? Why aren't they coming in? What is a disconnect? Where is a setback? I sat on the board for Chick-fil-A in one of our local communities, and just as a diversity thought partner. And it was quite interesting because they were before this Chick-fil-A was built, they were the conversation of where are we going to build it in inner city Atlanta. And so there was some concerns of, crime rates and just some different things that were going on in the community. And during one of their community sessions, which I really valued, the question was, why don't we put this, in this particular area? And so there was a great dialogue that took place. There was a target market that they were trying to reach, that they had continuously been trying to reach in this area. So the conversation was richer when we were able to engage community and constituents. So be mindful that, it may not be within the four walls of your business or of your institution that you get the answer. You may have to work with community partners and those that work with, that buy from you, that do business with you in some capacity, that you get those answers. That may give the insight that, last time I had this experience, and I continue to have this experience with customer service every single time that I'm there. So then that may directly give you an answer of, okay, we need to do an update on our customer service policies and procedures. We need to have a couple of meetings, in support of that to navigate that process. So just be mindful that it's not going to always come within your company, that you may have to go out and get that information. And we talked about, decision-making capabilities, but when we talk about capabilities, it allows you to have a wider subset, whether it's in the entity that you're working, or it's, looking at equity in terms of accessibility, right? Or the communications that go out. So the decision-making looks in a variety of different ways. And the last one that I'll point out, because some of them are there, but, identify new products and services for opportunities. There are diversity in data is probably one of my favorite topics in terms of, new opportunities. Because with looking at data so in detail in this way, you're going to see needs, right? You're going to see areas of gaps in which you can serve. Now, resources aren't always abundant, but you'll think of creative ways to kind of navigate that process throughout. And 4 ways to encourage diversity data is to clearly communicate. So, in the beginning, your entities may or may not have access to all of the diversity data, right? You may not have access to everything that's being displayed or with HR's, different subsets of data that you may have, but from the very beginning, I look at these 4 as ways to encourage data and to encourage a data collecting environment, because believe it or not, some people are very apprehensive to surveys. Some of you may be on this call. There's a true concern of, where's my data going and why are you collecting it and how are we going to navigate it? And we've done it before, and what did it do? You just collected this information and it sat on a shelf, right? But being mindful that, you want to clearly communicate to your employees why the data is being collected, right? There's no mystery. We're not hiding. We're saying, we're wanting to assess why people are leaving our company. So we're going to do a couple surveys to talk about, our climate, right? So being able to navigate in that space and then explain how their diversity data will be used. I want to know, and this is, I'm the first to say, even when I did the survey for my institution, so what's the goal of this data? I'm going to submit it. I work here. I'm bought in, but what are we doing? You can beat people to the punch when you just explain it. We're going to use diversity data to tell narratives of how we inclusively hire, or the lack of, right? If you're seeing trends in the hire, or you're seeing patterns within your hiring practices where everyone looks the same, talks the same, has the same thought patterns, right? It doesn't have to be, oftentimes when we think of inclusive hiring, we're thinking of gender and race, but socioeconomic status, access, diversity of thought, right? Are we looking beyond the basic gender and race, right? So being able to explain why you're pulling that data is so important. And then identify key benefits and reasons for collecting. So I need to be transparent in the benefits of collecting this data set, right? And if I'm not able to do that, then that goes back to the very, I think it was the 3rd slide on this presentation. Do you have a plan? Right? Do you have a plan to navigate this and moving forward? So making sure that you're able to communicate that is going to be very important. And then highlight to employees that the collection of diversity data is optional and that they can say no, right? So this is not sometimes when people hear the word diversity, there's an off-putting, but really it's the study of people, right? The study of difference. And so there is an opportunity to say no. You don't want to make people feel mandated to do any type of equity work. And so when you're looking at this, the connection to diversity and how this plays a role, it really adds to the additional conversation of your area. So if there's historic trends within your universities or your educational backgrounds or your businesses, it allows to continued evidence of conversations. It tracks initiatives and activities. So sometimes we're doing things just to do them. I'll give a key example. There were certain traditional potlucks or get food gatherings where, they would spend the businesses would spend X amount of money, but when resources were getting cut and they really couldn't explain why they were doing what they were doing, right? They couldn't prove that the, gathering of people was beneficial for work morale. They couldn't prove. So what happened? It got cut. We really have to be able to track initiatives. If you want initiatives to happen in your business or to continue the narrative where money is being funneled and supporting that area, you have got to make sure that you can track it through the data. So what type of, whether it's after an event or a function at the office or on your campuses, are you assessing the participants that were there? And not just, did you like the event? Was this beneficial? Would you recommend it? What do you have other ideas? But really collecting the data of the people. So what is their gender? What is their race? What is their, different aspects of intersecting identity, so that I know if someone says the event wasn't effective, I can connect that to a person versus it just being ambiguous, right? So that may grow over time within the culture of your workspaces, but you definitely want to think about that. And then it really allows you to look at a larger group of people and to see unique identities and needs, right? So there's unique identities and needs in each of your companies and each of your educational backgrounds. I'll give some example. I was talking to Janae yesterday, and when I used to work at CSU, the University System of Georgia decided to do an initiative to support African-American males in higher education. Well, why did they decide to do that? They decided to do it because they recognized, they looked through the data and they saw that African-American males were graduating at a lower rate than any other subset, right? And so as a whole, that's a concern. Our goal is to recruit, retain, and graduate students within the system. And so there was an initiative that was directly in connection to that, where funding was funneled into it, right? And that was a unique subset. While there is a large system of Georgia and there's large populations of students, there's different programs and initiatives that were hewed out for specific needs. So this is an example of that. And I'll continue to talk on that baseline to give you examples as we go through. When looking at types of data in terms of, key types, I like to say, you're looking at the different audiences. So whether it's their gender, ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, ability status, job level, length of employment, institutional role, or their department role, depending on the entity in which they work. You're wanting to gain aspects of that data in terms of your audiences. And then your facilitators. I can't stress enough, if someone is not skilled in data equity work, or just data subsets in general, we do not want them touching data. I've been in certain companies and work with, whether it's on through my company or through the institution, where, people have this bright idea of, okay, let's run a survey. But if you've never done this type of work, you're doing yourself a disservice. Or if you've done certain types of it, we have to protect the entities in which we serve, right? We have to make sure that the facilitators and the partners have done this work and will respect the data that they're working with. So timing may also be, a type of data when we're looking at longitudinal studies or frequencies, the dates. So it may just be, we're just looking at this particular event, right? This was a conference that our division hosted, or this was an event that our department hosted. Was it successful? Do I assess this just for this event? Is this an annual thing? When does it start? When does it end? The timelines and connections. So being mindful of that as you move forward. And then the experiences and the impressions, right? So when you navigate this, you work to hit the mark. What did participants take away? What was the common experience? That may be through Lacquer scales, through open-ended responses, but the experience is what we're seeking, right? We don't want to just do things in a subset, for our entities, and we're not knowing why we're doing it. How was the impact of each partner that was there? What was their experience? So when we look at the collection, that may be a variety of things. So that's, observational through the numbers of participants in the session. So who came, was it low participation? Because if we're running something, we're putting thousands and thousands of dollars into it, and we continue on a continuous basis to see low numbers. Or if you're being effective in your surveying and you start looking at the data in terms of intersecting identities, you see that there's a large population of, you know, minorities there, but or women there, but there's not a lot of men. That's why those are important, because then it's like, how can we work to make this event more inclusive to all genders, right? Do you have options for all inclusive parties in the space? So be clear that it's very important to, when you're looking at observational data, that you're looking at the participants that are there, the number, the sessions, you know, how often you're offering this. That's going to be impactful. An informal assessment, whether it's, you know, surveys or exit tickets, you know, faculty and staff and teachers love exit surveys. You can't leave here today. Even at the end of this presentation, you'll get a survey, right? So to understand and assess, you know, was this impactful? Was this a developmental opportunity for you? Academic performance, that a benchmarker in that would be graduation and retention rates. Institutional research, you know, published studies. You'll want to look at that even in your subset area. So if you're in the business market or if you're in recruitment, you know, what are some trends in sector? So what and where does your company fall in that subset? Where are we successful and where do we fail? And then beginning to look up different data collections so that you can see trends in your environment. So if you're in business and you're really people front facing, you know, what are trends in that sector? Where is it beneficial? Where is there some deficit? So looking at that from the very beginning. You know, you may, if you're in academic, session, review it in terms of on a semester basis, on a yearly basis. If you're in the business subset, you may look at it in quarters, right? In this particular quarter, we did well with this, we didn't do well with this, right? So taking the data and looking at it in terms of performance and, you know, different levels of understanding is going to be paramount in this space. You know, review to determine achievement and outcomes, you know, and research activities for next steps. So what if I look at this every year, for instance, we run an annual report, and at each quarter, I'm asking my division, what went well, what didn't go well, so that when we move into the next quarter, we have a benchmark of success, right? Success and failure, because failure teaches us far more than success does, right? So being mindful that that type of data being collected is the narrative for what the goals are for the future. So I want to give you an example from our institution, just so that you can see a subset and, you know, kind of grow from there. So for example, we have some demographics. I provided demographics of our institution in terms of our students. And you'll notice that I've highlighted a specific subset of participants, so Hispanic and Latino students, right? We see that, of course, now you're going to look at these numbers and say, what does it mean? And that's what we're here for, is to explain in greater detail. But you'll see there's a variety of different race and ethnic groups there. But in this particular subset, we see a continued level of growth as you move forward. Now, these 2 years, it's very important for us to understand that this was the height, right? There was booming institution, you know, people were coming into the institution, people knew the value of college, and they were going at a rapid rate. Now, across the world, there's been a decrease in students going to college, right? We hear it in the news, we see it in print, you know, that's happening. But nevertheless, even though there's been a dip, there's still been some levels of significant increase. 2020 happened, there was a decline, but nevertheless, the numbers still stayed steady. You notice in different groups, they did not. Right? So some of them did not. And so looking at this, you know, you're seeing trends. So what does it mean? So it's my job, it's my chief diversity officer's job for us to look at the data of our students, right? Look at the data of our faculty, look at the data of our staff, no different than it is for business partners to look at the diversity of their staff, right? And of their boards, and navigating that. And do you have this on a year-to-year basis? Who do you know who's at your companies? Can you pull a chart like this? Because if you can't, that's something that we want to initiate and start, right? But this is the number. I want to pull this subset. So what this caused us to do is we then started marketing our Hispanic and Latino alumni, companies that do direct services with Hispanic and Latino people in general. And we were able to generate a substantial amount of revenue to support students in terms of scholarship, support them. We saw trends of them being, and this is more, breaking down the data a little bit more, we saw that they started strong as freshmen. They may have had a somewhat of a different level of interaction in terms of, just belonging and understanding. So then they would continue on to their second semester, but you saw a decline and a drop off in sophomore year. So we then said, okay, so how do we partner? When we started talking to the alumni, when we started talking to our community partners, we were able to navigate that space. I see a question in the, in the chat. Let's see if I can.
Yes. So the question is, what is happening in international?
Oh, yes. So you have to think about, that's great. Great question. You have to think about where we are in the times that we are. So you see, we started smaller here. There wasn't really an office established directly in connection to that. So they, continue to grow the office and expand. One interesting subset of this is after 2020, there was a decline, and quite naturally we see that. But even in 2021, you saw an increase, but tuition, funding and all of those come into play. So it's so important that was a good question, because it's so important to look at that in the details. You automatically ask the question because you see the numbers here. And that's what we did, so circling back to the Hispanic population, because that's who we're looking at in detail. But even in the international, we've had some conversation with international students. All these groups, we've had conversations. We've gone out to the alumni. We've contacted community partners, right? And so we were able to raise a substantial amount of funding for scholarships, for sustainability conversations. So for instance, this semester, we ran a program where we invited all the alumni and local businesses to come in and talk about their experience from college. Now, they were all Hispanic and Latino, and they were able to talk about how they navigated college, what they did afterwards. Well, what does that do? That encourages you to want to remain and to graduate so that you can get the job, you can work at these companies, so that you can have the network. So being able to have that conversation, that was incorporated in education, but what can you do in different subsets, whether it's, you have a lot of equity months. So, Women Appreciation Month, is there some speaker that you can invite in that talks about working in the field of computing or science or in business, that can come in and talk about their experience and how they navigate it, so that if you have a person of difference within your division or your groups that you're working within, then you have that conversation. And then looking here at graduation rates, it directly impacts. So we not only took, a look at, the numbers here, but then we said, okay, where does that fall into graduation rates? Right. And we look at that because we need to see, not only do I want you to come to KSU, I want you to stay at KSU and have a good time, but most importantly, I want you to graduate in terms of the populations that come in. So just being mindful that those are very important to look at. So if you're working in a company and you don't know that, there's a concern of, is everybody being supported equally, right? So just navigating and have those conversations. And while I'm so optimistic and I'm so excited about it, there are some concerns. There are some legit gaps, some stops, some halts in this space. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that to you all in this space, because, you can go out and say, Dr. Williams said we should do this. Let's continue the conversation at our jobs. Well, let me tell you some stop points, right? With a lack of clarity, a lack of clarity regarding the reason for collecting data brings about a level of distrust. So we have got to really look at why we're doing what we're doing, right? If you're noticing trends in people leaving the company, why are we assessing the trends of people leaving the company, right? The lack of, a protocol in addressing the why brings about trust, a breach of trust. And that trust was very hard fought, right? Because you're already dealing with my data, my personal information. So my social economic status, my gender, my race. And for some people, those are sensitive areas of data collection. So being able to present certain conversations, that divulge, hard information of this is the hard truth. We're seeing that minorities are leaving in rapid rates. We need to see why. Right. Or we're seeing that, we're not we had an ADA concern where we're not as equitable in accessibility. Right. There's a true problem. Sometimes these conversations don't happen until we're in violation, right, of something. So we need to assess that, is our building accessible, right? Because we could be in a lawsuit if not. So we're going to collect data on who needs the accessibility, what type of accessibility is needed, and then how do we go about that? So just looking at that moving forward, and then need for people that are experts in the field. So if you just have your HR person pulling all the data of everybody that works on your team, that may or may not be everything that you need. You want to be clear that you need to pull this information and these resources so that you can advocate for certain staff. So if there's someone that needs, I've had several with our division, we're growing every single day, and accessibility needs are always needed to be, established, right? Screen readers, certain type of doors, it was so interesting because coming back from, we work on campus 4 days a week. We work from home, 1 day a week. But we're advocating, for justice in that space even more. But when I came in, I realized that I needed to stand. So I needed a standing desk. I needed to be able to do my work while standing. It's because I'm in Fitbit challenges. I'm in all kind of stuff to kind of keep me mobile throughout the day. Well, that turned into an accessibility conversation of and having that. And so I started filling out the paperwork for that and just submitting it in to just prove why I needed, a particular desk. Doctors, all these things, right? And I realized, are we doing this type of work on different levels in our division? Am I having these conversations when I'm onboarding somebody? Am I asking, or am I just saying, get to the work and let's go? Am I asking, do you have any accessibility needs? Some people may not be forthcoming with that, but when you say it, yes, I actually do. I have astigmatism and I need X, Y, and Z, right? So just being mindful of that, there's some concerns in having that conversation. Partnering with your HR individuals to do it is very key from the very beginning. Tips and tricks, as we kind of narrow down on our discussion today, inform your participants, your employees that are in the space, create and analyze questions to understand how to collect the data. We at an institutional level, and even when I work with corporate, there's a lot of survey fatigue. Right? There's a lot of survey fatigue where people are tired of filling out surveys. And I found it to be more time consuming, but more beneficial to have data subsets in terms of focus groups. Right. So when I first came on as the diversity officer, I really wanted to meet with the people. So I would host, coffee chats or lunch chats, or, meet me here for yogurt and whatever. I had to feed the people to come. So whatever works for your subset, do what you can do. But I needed the data. So I would have conversations, and sometimes, it would be subsets of, 6 to 8 people, no more than 10, right? Because I need to be able to hear everybody's voice in the space. But then that led to the meeting after the meeting where, hey, let me talk to you afterwards. I didn't feel comfortable sharing X, Y, and Z. Then I was able to collect another level of individual interview data, right? So I, for the first 2 weeks, did that, and I can see our institution in a different way. Whereas I could pull a survey, I can do, I can get that information, and we've done that. I'd rather pull it for event information instead of whole subsets, but I was able to pull that information, and I have the respect of the people of having one-on-one conversations. So don't think that you just have to do a survey, but be mindful that there's other ways. But the biggest thing is I need to prove that this is successful. So gaining small wins in the very beginning of, we realize that we need to address this accessibility need, and we assessed you all for it, and we realized that we need to have these particular doors coming in. Make sure you publish that you did this survey, this was the concern, and now we have the doors. Don't just do the work and not publish the work after, even if the publishing of the work is something to your dismay. Like we weren't accessible in X amount of buildings, but we are now, right? So being clear about the evidence that supports the data that you collected, that's going to be very important. We'll talk about visuals and tips. I'll pull the next slide, but I would say visuals are very important. Being relevant, is very important, and why you're doing in that particular subset in the groups that you serve. The timeliness. I don't want to do a survey and 2 years from now get the results, unless it's that type of a survey. If I'm doing a survey within that same 6 months to a year span, I should be hearing some results, right? So being mindful, and then being clear in the narrative as you navigate. So I want to talk to you about some ways to display your data, right? You have several different images here. So you have indicators that show, your KPI, that's going to be, this here, where you're looking at revenue, 2.9 million, or on average this. These are what I like to call the attention grabbers. So if we were in a deficit of something, or we had a lack of resources, or employees were leaving at this particular rate, this is my attention grabber, right? So instead of giving you pie charts and graphs and bars, I don't do that. If I need a proof a point, and if you want to prove a point in your business or in your institution, pull that big number of shock. X amount of faculty and staff are leaving, or staff are leaving because of X, Y, and Z. What? Then I want to read the data. Then I want to read the article that you're publishing. Right? You'll see that they do it in social media, they do it, attention grabbers, right? And then when you look at line charts, and how you navigate that space, you're really looking at, you're displaying the trends. So when you go through over a period of time, this is how this is impacted. The line charts impact my understanding in this way. Bar charts are going to break it down a little bit more simpler. So I can look at a bar chart, and I can say, okay, this has happened for this particular age group, this happened in this range, this particular amount of money, this time frame. That's going to break it down in a lot simpler form. Right? But you want to do this in a comparison of different group subsets, right? So you need the bar chart to be able to show more data and give more information. And then the column charts is really to compare side by side. So in 2015, this was this. So we had this amount of women versus in 2003, we had this amount of women, women versus men ratio, or minority supporting, versus, non-minority, right? So you'll be able to compare the amount of revenue that we had in this population versus the amount of revenue that we have, the sales that we were able to generate in this year to this year. Well, why this year were we so low? You can say, you can have different subsets of that. And then the pie chart clearly shows proportions, right? So whether it's you're talking, intersecting identities, whether you're talking funding sources, whether you're talking a variety of different things, you can look at that and it shows proportions of what you're referring to. This is important because when you're looking at how do I display this information, how do I explain what's going on, you want to figure out what is going to be most attractive to the audience that you're serving. If, I say this to our data team all the time, I need you to break our data down so that a kindergartner could understand it. and they get, we have amazing dialogue back and forth. I love my data team, right? But it is very true because, we need to know what's going on in the space, how we're navigating, how we're networking, how we're moving forward, and what group are we serving with this data, and what story do we need to tell. If I need to be really compelling, I'm going to look at, indicators, KPI indicators, right? I'm going to look at, if I need to tell the story of a subset of group of people of, where we start looking at different racial backgrounds, I may use more of a bar chart, right? If I need to compare, I need to think about who I'm talking to and what they need to hear to get that funding, what they need to hear to get that response for decision change in our policies and procedures. We need to think of that from the very, beginning and looking at those different subsets. So, in conclusion, as we, wrap this conversation, each of you are leaders in your areas. And it is very important to understand that as a leader, we are responsible for the people that we serve, right? I am responsible for over 50,000 students at an institution, and well over 30,000, all 50,000 populace, right? At our institution. I need to make sure that we're equitable in representation. I need to make sure that we're equitable in our practices. I need to make sure that when they show up to work, that they feel comfortable with the community that serves them. So that means that I have got to collect data to assess where we are. Right. And it's not an overnight process. Each of you sit as leaders in businesses in K through 12. And what is your response to the people that you serve? Diversity is not this, trick pony that we see in mass media. It is people work. Right? It is asking your colleagues and your faculty and your staff questions that will help promote better lives for them in their workspace. It is assessing that timing that you're doing meetings. It's assessing the accessibility to a building or something that they work with so that they can work better within the space. It is assessing, are we using our resources correctly? It is assessing, are we missing target groups? So I encourage each of you today, to take this presentation and to expand your knowledge in your subset, to benchmark other entities, other business sources, and to see different data that is collected in their area. And if you're not doing that, where can you start? Taking one small piece of information from today and just asking, where do we stand in terms of our ethnicity across the board in our division? Has there been trends in people leaving? And if it's so, what are those trends? We are the leaders in the space. We are the thought partners for our VPs. We are the VPs in some instances, and we're responsible for growing equitable civility or civil environments for our workspaces. So are we doing that? So I thank each of you for your time this afternoon. I respect your time. I know that we have an hour with you. So I wanted to leave a few moments for any questions. And it's okay if we don't. I know that we've had quite a bit of a conversation today, so I totally understand, navigating in that space. But we just want to offer the opportunity for you all to ask questions. And if you desire to put them in the chat, you're more than welcome to do so as well. Well, if there's no further questions, Janae and the Leadership Institute has my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm definitely there as a support system to them and to help build. But I really, really, really encourage you to not allow this just to be another presentation, but to allow this to be something that grows you as an individual, as a leader, to think broadly about who you serve. I will show that they've asked for me. There's one more session for you all. Thank you so much. I see in the chat. Thank you so much for your support and your comment in there. I appreciate that. Next, there is a minority stress theory. So that happens May 9th, 11 to noon. Same, what do they say? Same time, same station. You will have a dynamic speaker in that regard. So definitely check out. There's also a survey link for you to have, and you'll be able to click that if you want to do your phones and do your QR code. You'll be able to assess today's session. I'll now turn it back over to Janae.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Williams. That was a phenomenal presentation. All right, so to our guests, thank you for coming to our webinar today. We will make the recording of the presentation available on our Facebook page within 48 hours. If you want us to email the information to you, enter your email address in the chat and I'll be sure to grab that. Dr. Williams just showed you all the next session, so we hope to see you there. And on behalf of the staff at the Leadership Institute, thank you for your questions, interest, and engagement. If you have topic ideas, questions, or additional information, email us at leadershipinstitute@columbusState.edu. And thanks again.